The train screeched to a halt, stirring a cloud of dust around the tiny station of Ashmoor. Nora Ellis stepped down with a worn suitcase and a faded parasol, clutching a letter crumpled by too many readings. Her dress, once ivory, had yellowed with time and travel. Her gait was uneven, the right leg dragged slightly, an old burn hidden beneath the fabric and lace. She had come here to be someone's wife, to start over, to be wanted. At the far end of the platform, a man stood in a pressed vest and polished boots, holding a single red rose. Clayton Reed. He glanced at her, then again, his expression shifting from expectation to something colder. He took a step forward, then froze. "You're Miss Blythe?" he asked, his voice lined with hesitation. "I am," Nora replied, trying to soften her limp and offer a smile. "I received your letter," but he raised a hand. "You didn't mention your condition. This isn't what I signed up for." A murmur rose from onlookers. A woman asked. A boy laughed cruelly. Nora's breath caught in her throat. "I'm sorry," Harold said stiffly. "I thought I was getting someone whole." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving the rose on the bench to wilt in the sun. Nora stood alone, the weight of the crowd's silence pressing in. She picked up her suitcase. The handle snapped. Her knees buckled as she tried to gather the scattered items. Threadbare garments, a small framed photo of a baby, a scorched Bible. From the shadows near the end of the platform, a man watched. His coat was dusty, his hat pulled low. A long scar ran from his jaw to his collarbone, half hidden by his collar. No one dared speak to him. No one ever did. He watched Nora gather the pieces of her life without offering help. But something in his eyes shifted. Nora spent that night behind the depot, using her shawl as a blanket. The cold bit through the fabric, but she was too numb to care. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years, not since the fire. The one that took her husband, the one that took her baby, the one that left her body and heart scorched. A rooster crowed in the distance. Another day was beginning in Ashmoor. Nora pulled herself upright and looked toward the town where she had no friends, no home, and no future. But she took one step forward, then another. The man from the shadows was still watching, and though he did not move, something in him stirred, like the wind before a storm. Ashmoor was the kind of town where folks remembered things too well, especially the kind of things people wanted forgotten. Nora walked its dirt streets at dawn, her shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders. A few storekeepers were unlocking their doors, casting her curious, cautious glances. One woman crossed to the other side of the street, murmuring something about damaged goods. She paused in front of the bakery. The smell of fresh bread made her stomach ache, but the look the baker's wife gave her, pity laced with disgust, sent her walking again. By noon, her feet throbbed and her leg burned. She knocked on every door that didn't slam shut before she could speak. "I can sew, I can cook. I was once a school teacher," she offered. But no one wanted a school teacher with a limp and a haunted gaze. At last she wandered to the edge of town where a crooked sign read, "Widow Martha's Rooms." A tired-looking woman in her 60s answered the door, hair tucked beneath a fraying bonnet. "I don't take in strangers," Martha said sharply. "I'm not looking for charity," Nora replied, holding out a pair of gloves she had embroidered herself. "Just one night, I can pay you with these." Martha studied her. "You're the bride who got turned away, ain't ya?" Nora flicked. "Well," Martha sighed, "I've been turned away more times than I can count." "Come in." She led Nora to a narrow loft room with a creaky bed and a draft that whispered through the slats. Still, it was warm, and it didn't smell of piss and sawdust like the depot floor. That night, Nora stared at the ceiling, the glow of the oil lamp flickering over cracked plaster. The fire came to her again, as it did every night. The smell of smoke, the roar of flame, her baby's cries swallowed by the blaze, her husband's hands slipping from hers as the roof collapsed. She woke gasping, hand over her chest. Downstairs, she heard Martha muttering in her sleep. Nora tiptoed outside and sat on the porch, looking at the hills beyond town. Stars flickered above like tiny wounds in the sky. And then she saw him, the same man from the station, broad-shouldered, still watching from the trees like a ghost who'd never been laid to rest. He made no move to come closer, but his presence wrapped around her like smoke. She didn't wave, didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. The next morning, Nora rose early and asked Martha if she could sweep, mend linens, do anything to earn her keep. Martha grunted and handed her a torn tablecloth. "Don't bleed," on it was all she said. By midweek, the townsfolk whispered louder. The woman who got turned away was living with the widow Martha. Some said she was mad. Others said cursed. One boy called her ghost-legged and tossed a pebble at her. She didn't flinch. She'd been hit by but the looks cut deeper than stones. And always, that man watched. From the hill, from behind the stables, from the edge of the woods. Not like a predator, more like a sentry, as if guarding something he wasn't sure deserved to be protected. The sun was bleeding into the horizon when Nora made her way back. From the well with 2 pails of water and a spine sore from bending all day. Martha had grown quieter lately, her eyes flicking toward the window every time Boots passed outside. Nora didn't ask why, she already knew. It was the stares, the whispers. The town had decided she didn't belong. She was the broken one, the left behind one, the woman whose groom took one look and walked away. And in a place like Ashmoor, being unwanted was a curse worse than any fever. That evening, Nora took her mending basket and sat behind the tavern, near the back porch. She liked the quiet there, until it wasn't. Evening pretty ghost, came a slurred voice from the shadows. She froze. 3 men emerged, drunk, arms loose, eyes sharp with mischief. She recognized one from the general store. The other 2 were strangers with rotting teeth and grins too wide. She limps, but I bet she still dances, one said, stepping too close. I'm not looking for trouble, Nora said, standing, clutching her basket like a shield. Trouble found you, sweetheart, said the second man, grabbing her the wrist. She slapped him hard enough to sting, but not enough to scare. The first one shoved her against the wall, knocking her cane loose. Her legs buckled, pain shot up her side. Then came a sound, boots fast and heavy. A fourth figure stepped into the alley and everything changed. He moved like a storm, silent, sudden, without mercy. In 3 breaths, 1 man was on the ground, another bleeding from his nose, the third running. The stranger grabbed the last drunk by the collar, slammed him against the wall and said just 4 words, "Don't touch her again." Then he turned to Nora. In the pale light she saw him clearly for the first time. Tall, rugged, a scar across his jaw, eyes like thunder clouds, gray, angry but not at her. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded shakily, though her leg throbbed. Without waiting, he lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest. She tried to protest, but he said nothing more. He simply carried her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, past the saloon, past the church, past the edge of town, up a path she hadn't seen before into the trees, to a wooden cabin built into the slope of a hill. He pushed open the door with his boot and laid her on a cot by the fire. "I'll make tea," he said. She stared at him. You live here?" she asked, breathless. He nodded. "It's quiet. What's your name?" He hesitated. "Gideon Wolfe." She tried to sit up. "I should go." "You shouldn't," he interrupted. "They'll be looking for you, to finish what they started." Nora swallowed hard. The fire crackled between them. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He looked at her like it was the dumbest question he'd ever heard. "Because no one else did." The cabin smelled of pinwood and smoke. Its walls were bare but solid. The floor swept clean. A kettle hissed on the fire and Nora sat wrapped in a wool blanket, watching Gideon Wolfe move like a man used to being alone. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer comfort, just poured her tea and set it beside her with a nod, then sat in the opposite chair, staring into the flames. She sipped slowly. The warmth calmed her hands, which had been shaking since the Yar alley. "I didn't think men like you existed," she said softly. Gideon Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous ones, quiet ones, who listen." He didn't reply. The next morning, Nora woke to the sound of boots and wood being chopped outside. She rose carefully, her legs still sore, and found a folded flannel shirt and a slice of bread waiting on the table. Her dress hung by the fire, dry and repaired at the hem. She stepped outside. The forest opened around the cabin, golden in the morning light. Gideon Wolfe stood a few feet away, splitting logs. His sleeves were rolled up. His arms were scarred, strong. "You didn't have to fix my dress," she said. He didn't look at her. "It was torn. I didn't have to stay." "You didn't," he agreed, lifting another log. That night, Nora cooked for them both. Nothing fancy, just boiled potatoes and beans. Gideon Wolfe didn't compliment her cooking, but he didn't leave a crumb on the plate either. They sat in silence again, as the fire crackled and the wind pushed against the windows. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 7 years. Alone. A pause. "Always." She studied him. "You don't talk much." He shrugged. "Words aren't always true. People are better judged by their hands." She looked at his, calloused, steady. Hers trembled as she reached for her tea. After 3 nights, Nora tried to leave. "I can't impose," she said, packing her eigen things. "I've taken too much already." Gideon Wolfe stood at the door, arms crossed. "You go down that hill, they'll remember what happened in the alley. They'll remind you of it every day. Here, they can't touch you." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're safe here, that's all." Tears stung her eyes. "Why do you care?" Gideon Wolfe stared at her for a long moment. then said, "Because I know what it's like to be blamed for what the fire didn't kill." She didn't move, neither did he. Finally, she dropped her bag and stayed. Days passed. Nora found purpose in small things, sweeping the floor, drying herbs, knitting near the window. Gideon Wolfe built her a proper cane from cedar wood, said nothing as he handed it to her. She took it like it was a gift from the Lord himself. When a storm hit one night, thunder shaking the roof, Nora woke with a cry. Gideon Wolfe appeared at her door, just a shadow in the dark. "Bad dream?" he asked. "Yes. Wanna talk about it?" She shook her head. He nodded once. Alrein turned to leave. "Gideon Wolfe." He paused. "Can I sit by the fire with you?" He nodded again. And so they sat, two wounded souls in silence, closer than words would allow. The forest had begun to thaw. Snow still clung to the highest branches, but the earth beneath Nora's boots was soft breathing again. Each day she woke before the sun boiled water for tea, and watched Gideon Wolfe disappear into the woods with his rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't say where he went. She didn't ask. Instead, she tended the garden he'd never planted, pulling weeds, tilling frozen soil with a kitchen knife. Life had to start somewhere, even if it wasn't ready yet. One afternoon, as she searched the pantry for matches, Nora found a drawer half stuck. Curious, she pulled it open. Inside was a stack of letters, neatly tied with twine, their envelopes yellowed, the handwriting careful. She shouldn't have read them, but she did. "Dear Anna," the first began. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't stop hearing your voice even now. I should have been there. I should have died with you." Letter after letter. The words changed, but the guilt never left. Anna was Gideon Wolfe's sister. In one, he confessed he'd told her to stay home that day. In another, he admitted he hadn't fought hard enough to stop their father from forcing her to marry a TUI man she feared. "They say I killed him," he wrote in one letter. "I didn't, but sometimes I wish I had." Nora folded the letters with trembling hands. This man, this silent, scarred man, had been carrying the weight of another fire, one made of secrets and regret. That night she waited until Gideon Wolfe returned, blood on his knuckles from a fight with a tree that wouldn't fall. "I found the letters," she said quietly. He froze. "I read them." He didn't speak. "I know about Anna." Still nothing, only the sound of the fire. "I lost my child in a fire," she said, eyes burning. "My husband died saving me. I wanted to die with them, but I didn't. I lived and I hated myself for it." Gideon Wolfe finally looked at her, not with anger, with recognition. "I was in the hospital for weeks. My leg had never healed right. The pain never left. Neither did the guilt." He stepped forward slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "I didn't kill him," Gideon Wolfe said at last. His voice cracked like old leather. "But I wanted to, for what he did to her." "She trusted you," Nora whispered. "I failed her." They stood there in silence, two people hollowed out by loss. Then Nora did something she hadn't done in years. She reached for him. Her hand touched his chest lightly, and he didn't flinch. "You didn't fail her," she said. "You loved her. That's why it still hurts." Gideon Wolfe's breath caught. His eyes welled, but no tears fell. They stood like that for a long time. No more secrets between them, only silence and truth. Later she sat by the fire, darning his shirt with slow, precise stitches. He watched her from across the room, not saying a word. But when she dropped the needle, his hand was there before hers, not to give it back, just to hold it. Not tight, but enough. Spring arrived like a hesitant apology. The hills surrounding Ashmoor flushed green and the air softened. But with the thaw came movement of people, of news, of judgment. It started with a rider from town stopping at Widow Martha's, asking questions. "You've seen the broken bride lately?" he asked, spitting chew onto the dirt. "Folks are wondering where she crawled off to." Martha, who once muttered that Nora had 3 days before she'd be kicked out, now stared the man down and said nothing. The next day, a yeet wagon passed the cabin's trailhead and left behind a pile of rocks, stacked deliberately in the shape of a cross. A warning. Gideon Wolfe burned it that night without a word, but Nora saw the worry in his eyes, just like she saw the tightening of his jaw when she dared to visit the market alone a few days later. She needed thread, and she needed to prove she still belonged in the world. The whispers started before she even stepped off the horse. "She's living in sin, up there with him. No wonder the Lord took her baby. She's cursed." Nora kept her head high, walked slowly, cane tapping against the planks, but her hands trembled as she paid for the spool of thread, her voice barely above a whisper when she said thank you. It wasn't the cruelty that broke her, it was the familiarity of it. The same look she saw after the fire, The same half-smiles at church before her husband's coffin was lowered into the earth. The way people only offered kindness if you stayed small and sorry. She wasn't sorry anymore. Back at the cabin, she found Gideon Wolfe sharpening a blade. He looked up, saw her pale face. "Tell me," he said simply. She told him everything. The words, the rocks, the judgment that had followed her like smoke since the day she boarded that train. "I'm not ashamed," she said, voice rising. "But they want me to be. You don't owe them anything." She laughed bitterly. "Then why does it still feel like I do?" Gideon Wolfe stood, reached for the shelf behind the stove. From it, he pulled a long, thin box. Inside was a revolver, polished, clean, unused. "I swore I'd never carry again," he said. "But if they come here, if they hurt you, I won't hesitate." She stared at him. "I don't want you to fight for me. You won't have to ask." Nora reached for his hand. "I don't want you to carry that weight again." He closed the box. "I'd rather carry that than watch them tear you apart." That night, Nora stood outside under the stars. The cabin glowed behind her like a lantern against the dark. She remembered something her husband used to say: "The world breaks everyone, but if you're lucky, someone finds the pieces worth saving." Gideon Wolfe stepped outside beside her. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their shadows stretched long across the grass. Two broken silhouettes standing whole together. The dress had followed her like a shadow, folded, tucked, hidden deep in the bottom of her bag. It still carried the scent of smoke. Not the smoke from the fire that ruined her life, but the smoke of shame, of failure, of expectations unmet. It was the dress she wore when she arrived in Ashmoor. The one she chose carefully after answering Clayton Reed's letter. A modest ivory gown stitched by hand, meant to signal purity, hope, readiness to be chosen again. But no one had chosen her, and now, weeks later, in the safety of Gideon Wolfe's cabin, it still haunted her. Each fold a reminder of what she had tried to become for someone else. She pulled it out on a cloudless morning, the sky too blue to be carrying grief. Gideon Wolfe was away, tracking a coyote that had been nosing near the chicken coop. Alone, Nora walked down to the creek and stood beneath the birch trees, holding the dress like it was someone she needed to bury. She built the fire herself, flint dry moss twigs, and when it caught, she hesitated. For just a second, the wind blew through the trees, and she thought she heard her child's voice, a distant echo of laughter that never got to grow up. Then she dropped the dress into the flames. It curled, hissed, and turned black at edges. Lace turned to ash, threads glowed and snapped like nerves being severed. She didn't cry. She stood tall, arms crossed over her chest, as if bracing against the heat of her own liberation. Behind her, a twig cracked. She turned and found Gideon Wolfe watching, leaning silently against a tree. He said nothing, just looked at her with that unreadable gaze he wore like armor. "I needed to," she said. He nodded once. "I know." She sat by the fire, knees pulled to her chest. He joined her, knees bent, arms resting on them, both staring into the remains. "Did you ever want to be married?" she asks, surprising herself. Gideon Wolfe thought for a long time. "Not after Anna died. Not after the things I saw." "What did you see?" "People don't love each other the way they say they do. Not when it costs them something." Nora looked at him. "Then why did you save me?" "Because it cost me nothing." She frowned. "Letting them hurt you, that would have cost me something." She shifted closer. "Do you think we're broken?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. "Then maybe. But broken things don't lie. They don't pretend. They just are." "I'd rather be broken and true," she said. He looked at her, really looked. His eyes weren't hard anymore. They were soft, uncertain. "You're not broken," he said. "You're unfit." The sun dipped behind the trees, casting them both in a wash of orange and gold. She reached for his hand again, this time not trembling, and he let her. They walked back to the cabin together, and that night, for the first time, they didn't sit in silence. They talked about everything. The way her husband used to hum while brushing her hair. The way Gideon Wolfe used to sing lullabies to Anna when their father got too loud. The taste of coffee before battle. The sound of a baby's first laugh. Wounds that no longer bled but still ached when touched. Later, when the fire turned to embers, and she stood to leave for her room, Gideon Wolfe gently touched her wrist. "You don't have to sleep alone tonight," he said. She didn't answer with words. She just and in the quiet hush of the mountain night, two people once shattered, found something neither thought they'd ever feel again. Peace. The morning smelled of ash before there was any smoke. Nora was the first to notice something in the wind. Something off. She stood at the edge of the clearing holding a bucket of water when a shadow moved across the tree line. Not the quiet presence of deer, not Gideon Wolfe returning from the ridge. This was heavier. Intentional. She dropped the bucket. By the time she made it back to the cabin, Gideon Wolfe was already lacing his boots and strapping his rifle. His jaw was locked. "How many?" she asked. He looked at her eyes hard. "3, maybe 4. I saw horses behind the ridge." "Who?" "Clayton Reed and 2 men from town. Maybe more." Her blood turned cold. "Harold, the man who left her on the platform like a broken parcel. The one who'd told everyone she wasn't fit to be a wife. He hadn't taken her rejection quietly." "They're not just coming to talk," Gideon Wolfe added. Nora didn't ask how he knew. She just nodded. "I'll hide in the root cellar," she said. "No, Gideon Wolfe, if they hurt you, I'll never forgive myself. They're coming for me. They'll find me." There was no more time. The first shot rang out like thunder, splitting the silence. Gideon Wolfe shoved Nora behind the table and returned fire through the window. She could hear hooves circling, shouting from the trees. Glass shattered, wood splintered. She crawled to the back room, heart pounding, pulling blankets and supplies into a satchel. She saw the revolver in its box on the shelf. Without thinking, she took it. Another explosion. The roof groaned. Smoke. They'd lit the back wall. "Gideon Wolfe," she screamed, coughing. He kicked the door open, grabbed her by the waist and threw his coat over her head. Fire licked at the rafters. He barreled through the heat, shielding her with his body. Outside, the world spun. Smoke clawed at her lungs. Then they were in the dirt, behind a stack of logs. Gideon Wolfe bled from a gash across his arm and was limping. "They're gone," he gasped, but Nora heard footsteps. A final figure emerged from the trees. Harold, rifle in hand, hat low, face twisted in triumph. "You should have stayed broken," he sneered at her. "Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." Gideon Wolfe stepped in front of her, bloodied, barely standing. "Leave," he growled. Harold raised the rifle and Nora pulled the trigger first. The shot rang out. Harold dropped like a stone. Gideon Wolfe turned, stunned. She was shaking, arms still outstretched. "I told you," she whispered. "You didn't have to carry the weight alone." They stood in the clearing, the cabin behind them collapsing in flames. And the town, watching from afar, could no longer ignore what had just happened. The woman they called Broken had just saved the most feared man in the valley. The fire smoldered long after the cabin collapsed, filling the valley with a haze that clung to every breath. Gideon Wolfe stood beside what was once his home, blood still, soaking the sleeve of his torn shirt. Nora pressed a cloth against the wound, her hands steady, her eyes locked on the horizon. No townsfolk had come to help, but they had watched. By dusk, a few ventured up the hill. The preacher came first, riding slowly, his face somber. He dismounted without a word, hat in hand. "We heard what happened," he said. Gideon Wolfe didn't respond. He simply stared. Nora stood beside him, chin high. "I defended myself," she said before anyone could accuse her. "I know," the preacher replied. "Word travels fast when there's blood on dirt." He looked around. The ruins, the charred trees, the revolver still resting in Nora's belt. Then his gaze softened. "You saved a man, Miss Blythe, and a town that never deserved you saw it happen." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I came to say," the preacher continued, "that a few of us, we'd like to help rebuild, or offer supplies at least." Gideon Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You think lumber and beans fix this?" he said, voice low but sharp. "You watched them chase her into exile. You called her cursed. Now you bring nails and pretend it never happened." The preacher lowered his head. Nora gently touched Gideon Wolfe's arm. "It's enough," she whispered. "Not for us, but for them." He held her gaze, then nodded once. By the next morning, supplies arrived, silently, without apology. A sack, a flower, a hammer, a bundle of blankets left at the edge of the trail. Not forgiveness, not redemption, but an acknowledgement, a beginning. Gideon Wolfe and Nora slept under the stars for 3 nights, side by side beneath a patched canvas, stretched between trees. She woke once to find his hand over hers, his brow furrowed in sleep, like he feared she'd vanish if he let go. She never moved. On the 4th day, Gideon Wolfe led her through a new clearing just beyond the ashes. A single tree stood there, twisted, blackened, but alive. At its base he had started to build. No words, no plans, just a new home. She stood beside him watching the frame rise. He taught her to hammer without splitting the wood. She taught him to laugh at his own mistakes. They cooked over an open fire, shared bread without speaking, and stitched a quilt from scraps of burnt cloth and old curtains Martha had sent up. One morning, Nora woke to find a carved wooden ring resting beside her bedroll. No inscription, no diamonds, just smooth, warm cedar. She held it to her chest, eyes closed, heart full. Later that evening, as they stood beneath the birch tree that had witnessed so much, she placed it on her finger. He didn't ask, she didn't explain, but when their hands met in the dusk, no vow was needed. It was done, and for the first time, in a long, long time, Nora smiled, not because she hoped for love, but because she finally knew what it looked like when it stayed. Years passed like migrating birds, quietly, but never without a trace. The second cabin stood taller than the first, with windows that caught the morning light, and a garden Nora planted herself, one seed at a time. The birch tree still leaned, at the edge of the clearing, its bark marked with initials now faded but still there. The townsfolk didn't forget what happened, but they stopped talking. The whispers dulled, replaced by nods in the street, by hesitant greetings in the market. Some sent letters of apology, others sent silence, which Nora sometimes preferred. She had nothing left to prove. She was no longer the bride who arrived by train. She was a woman who had survived the fire. Twice, Gideon Wolfe rarely left the mountain, but every few weeks Nora rode down to town for supplies, her limp now steady, almost graceful. The children called her Miss Nora, and she smiled at the sound. One spring afternoon, a new wagon arrived at Ashmoor. No one had sent for it. A mail-order bride, just like Nora once was, stepped down onto the same platform Nora had once stood on, young, nervous, clutching a bouquet of dried flowers. Her name was June, and no one came to claim her. Rumors spread quickly. She never told him she had a stutter. Some said, she looks too thin. Others added, must be sickly. By nightfall, June was sitting alone outside the inn, the dress she'd stitched by hand dusted with road dirt, her eyes swollen from holding back tears. Nora approached without a word. She sat beside the girl, offered her half a biscuit wrapped in cloth. June looked at her, startled. They said you lived up in the hills, she whispered. I do. They say you shot a man. Nora smiled softly. I did. June's voice shook. They called me broken. Nora looked at her, eyes kind but firm. They called me worse. Silence settled between them like a shared wound. Would you like to come with me? Nora asked. To your cabin? To your second chance? The girl nodded, eyes brimming. As they rode together into the hills, Nora felt the familiar weight of judgment melt from her shoulders. The trail curved beneath them like an old scar that had learned to heal. At the edge of the forest, Gideon Wolfe stood chopping wood, his shirt rolled at the sleeves, hair silvering at the temples now. He looked up, saw the wagon, the girl, Nora's hand on the reins. He said nothing, but he nodded once, and that was enough. That night, as stars bloomed across the sky, Nora sat on the porch with June asleep inside. Gideon Wolfe joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. She looks like you did, he said. No one looked like me back then. She looks like someone standing where I once did, ready to begin. Nora sipped her tea, warm against the mountain air. I wasn't broken, she said softly. I was bruised, I was grieving, but I was never less. Gideon Wolfe reached for her hand, worn and weathered as his. You were never less. You were always more than they could see. In the stillness, the wind carried the sound of leaves rustling and a baby crying from a distant cabin below. Someone else's story just beginning. And Nora, once discarded, once shattered, leaned into the man beside her, and knew with absolute certainty, the world might try to burn you down, but some fires forge you. Nora's story reminds us that healing doesn't always come in grand gesture. Sometimes it's a quiet presence, a steady hand, a home built from ashes. So let me ask you, have you ever felt discarded? Like the world had already decided your worth before you had the chance to show it? Or maybe, just maybe, you were someone else's safe place, like Gideon Wolfe was to Nora. Tell us in the comments, which moment in this story touched you the most? Your words might help someone else feel seen today. And if you believe that even broken things can become beautiful again, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories.